lovely and darling viewers, it's Jen here at Chuck Her Joy. Today I'm going to do my favorite audiobooks. So, as I've been staying at home for the last month, I have just been listening to audiobooks while I do other stuff. So I can still do chores, walk the dog, make masks, do dot-to-dots, all of that while I'm listening to audiobooks, which is good because I'm having trouble concentrating and doing just like one thing right now, which seems weird because I have like almost all the time in the world, but like this is how I'm coping, guys. So these are like my favorite audiobooks of all time, not just what I've been listening to lately. In fact, I don't think any of these are audiobooks that I listened to lately. But they stand the test of time. Okay. First up is the How to Train Your Dragon books by Cressida Cowell. They are narrated by David Tennant, which is like the best part of the audiobooks. So this series is about a young boy named Hiccup. He is the son of the village chief, but he's not what you would expect a normal chief's son to look like. Like, his dad is burly and masculine, the typical Viking, and Hiccup's basically a scrawny little nerd. So in this society, the dragons and the humans pair together. Hiccup has to go find a dragon he adopts toothless, so he literally has this baby dragon to take care of, and it is so adorable. David Tennant does voices for every single character. They all sound really unique and really interesting, but my favorite voice in the entire series is Toothless the baby dragon, and like the high-pitched, really, really adorable sound he does. I do like the physical books for the How to Train Your Dragon series, though, because they also have illustrations. So there's Hiccup with Toothless on his bed, and they are just so cute. So this is one series where I have listened to the audiobook while reading along with the physical book so that I could catch Cressida Cowell's illustrations because they are that cute. So the one where if I ever meet anybody who's like, what audiobook should I listen to? I'm like, this is the one that is like my go-to recommendation to go listen to the How to Train Your Dragon series. Whether you like children's books or just fantasy or whatever, like they're that good. My next recommendation is The Stone Rose by Jacqueline Rayner. This is a Doctor Who novel. It is also narrated by David Tennant. He plays the 10th Doctor in the television show, so having him narrate the audiobook is also great because obviously anytime the Doctor talks, it sounds like the Doctor because it is the Doctor. This one is about the Doctor and Rose going to a museum in London in present day, finding this really old statue that looks exactly like Rose, and then they go back in time to find out how or why that statue got made. Obviously, they're traveling through time, so it's kind of an obvious, like, well, they went back in time and somebody sculpted her. But there's such a bigger mystery and plot-wise surrounding it. Again, David Tennant is narrating this, and his ability to do different voices is amazing. My three favorites in this are him playing the 10th Doctor, because he is the Doctor. The second one is him doing Mickey's voice. It sounds nothing like Noel Clarke, who plays Mickey in the television show, but it is exactly what I think the Doctor hears when Mickey talks, which is kind of this dismissive, small voice, it's funny and hilarious to hear the Doctor like trying to mimic Mickey. And the third one is that there's this genie-like character that has a similar voice to Toothless in the How to Train Your Dragon series, where it's like this cute, adorable, small voice, and it's just, I love it so much. So basically, if the option is to listen to David Tennant narrating a book, I would highly recommend that because he is so good at it. Similarly, I've also picked Star Wars Ahsoka, which is written by E.K. Johnston, and it is narrated by Ashley Eckstein, who plays Ahsoka in the Clone Wars and Rebels television shows. So you're having the actress who plays the character in the show being the one who's narrating the book, which is just always great. So Ahsoka takes place in between the Clone Wars and the Rebel television shows, basically. It's a year after the end of, what's the third prequel movie? Something with the Sith. Basically, after Anakin goes crazy and becomes Darth Vader, a year after that, we have Ahsoka, who was Darth Vader, Anakin's Padawan, his student, and she doesn't know that Darth Vader is Anakin. She hasn't connected those dots. And so we see her grieving the loss of her mentor. She thinks Anakin's just dead. All the rest of the Jedi are dead. She barely escaped with her life as it was. And seeing her deal with that, but also getting like roped back into helping with the fight and the rebellion, even though she just kind of was planning on laying low. And doing all of that with Ashley Eckstein actually narrating it is amazing. And also there's audio and like music being mixed into it, so you hear the like Darth Vader's theme and the Jedi theme, and having the soundtrack to the movies like woven within the audiobook was also great. So I highly recommend that one. Then one of my favorite series period is the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. These are narrated by Rebecca Soler, and the first book is Cinder. These are dystopian fairy tale retellings. The first book tells the story of Cinderella, second book introduces Little Red Riding Hood, third book introduces Rapunzel, and the fourth book, Winter, introduces Snow White. But these are futuristic adaptations of it, set against like the evil queen from the moon trying to take over the earth, and a plague that is spreading all throughout the world. And these princesses are standing up to her. They're not really princesses in this world, but like normal humans who just share similarities with these fairy tale characters. My favorite is the fact that Cinder is like a cyborg, so she's part robot, part human. And because of that, she's like a second-class citizen. She doesn't have full rights, but she ends up meeting the prince of their like empire, and the two of them with their meet cute, which is like in chapter 1, like the very first scene is like the most adorable thing. Like immediately this series like drags you in. So I love it. I love sci-fi, I love romance, I love fairy tales. Like this just hits every single box that I love. Next up, I have Neil Gaiman's books, which are fantasy, science fiction, kind of darker, quirkier stories. I love all of his writing, and anytime he narrates his stuff, it's great because you know it's his pacing and his voice just naturally lends itself to those kind of stories. But my favorite one is Norse Mythology, which are just retellings of Norse myths. So it's still set in the Viking world, going back to the original Norse myths, but it feels kind of modern with the language that he's using. And also I just really love Loki, and I love a Norse version of Loki too, because he's not quite evil. Like, he's one of the gods, and sometimes he's helpful, but also he's mischievous and is always playing pranks. And just anytime that Loki shows up, like, I love it. One of my favorite stories is about how he becomes impregnated with a horse. So Loki's trying to distract this builder when he can't distract the builder itself, he then shapeshifts into a horse and seduces the builder's horse so he can't do his work. And then Loki becomes pregnant because he became a female horse. And it's just so funny. And I love those kind of quirky stories. So yes, Norse mythology. I'm going way too fast. I feel like I'm like shaking and jittering, guys. Sorry. The next two I have are longer stories, and I prefer the audiobooks for longer books because it doesn't feel quite as bad. Like, yes, I'm looking at 23 hours of an audiobook or something, but being able to do other stuff during those 23 hours doesn't feel as pressing as like sitting down and having to sit for that amount of time in a chair. Sometimes it's just really daunting. So when it comes to longer books, I prefer audiobooks. So my two favorites have been Outlander by Diana Gabaldon, which is narrated by Davina Porter. This is a story about a nurse from 1945, right after World War II ends, who ends up going back in time to, I think, the 1700s, somewhere in there, during the time in the Scottish clans, and getting embroiled in that. And part of it's a time travel aspect, part of it's taking her medical knowledge and helping in the past, but also there's this romance between her and one of the guys in the past, Jamie, and then she has a husband in 1945, and how she's struggling with the fact that she loves both these guys, but also trying to stay true to both of them. And I love that internal struggle with her. And it's really romantic. It does get dark sometimes, and there is definitely rape and violence in it, so if that's not your thing, it may not be your book. The other really long book that I really enjoyed as an audiobook was The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, and I listened to a version narrated by John Lee. So The Count of Monte Cristo tells about this man who had everything going for him and like the perfect life. He's about to be made captain of a ship at a really young age. He's about to marry his childhood sweetheart. It's going to be amazing, except on the eve of his wedding, 3 guys who are jealous of all his wealth jealous of his wife, jealous of the ship he's got, jealous of just his money. They band together and have him arrested. Thrown in a jail for like 14 years. When he finally does manage to escape, he has spent that time learning from another prisoner and becoming very cultured. And he was also told about this buried treasure. So he goes and finds the treasure, and then he reemerges in society and starts calling himself the Count of Monte Cristo. And then he uses it to exact revenge on the guys who are responsible for him being thrown in jail. And it's all like this perverted sense of justice and like irony. And it's fun, but it's also really long, and it was a lot easier to listen to the audiobook, especially as sometimes it got too much into narration and like background details that I didn't really care about. So it's easier to listen to an audiobook for those where I can definitely do something else at the same time. I also like listening to audiobooks when it comes to history, books that I'm kind of interested in but not like fully dedicated to. So I also like narrative stories, so I like biographies and histories that have like following one town and like fleshing it out with characters. Anyway, the best biography I've listened to an audiobook is Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow, and it's narrated by Scott Brick. So this is the book that the musical Hamilton is based off of, and is totally the reason why I read it. I'm not even gonna lie. And it just tells the story of Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers of the United States, and how he went from being really poor in this island nation to moving to the colonies, being part of the revolution and the founding of the country, and creating, the Constitution and creating the Coast Guard and all the really amazing things he did. Like, he did so much stuff. Like, he was working nonstop, basically. That's one of the songs in Hamilton, if you didn't know. I also appreciated having listened to Hamilton and then hearing lines in the audiobook that are literally just like got translated into the show. Like, some of those sentences are just straight from that book, and I love it. So it was always fun to like hear that. I'm like, oh, that's the line from the show. That's where he got it. I loved Hamilton, and I loved the autobiography by Ron Chernow. I also really like listening to celebrity biographies and like essays that are read by the person who wrote them. My favorite of which is Why Not Me by Mindy Kaling, narrated by Mindy Kaling. This is just like her telling stories about how she got into show business and working on The Office, and then starting to develop the Mindy Project, which I really love the Mindy Project. And getting to hear Mindy and hear her voice just flesh that out, and it feels very conversational, so I really like listening to that audiobook. And I think it works better if you're listening to a celebrity story to like have that celebrity read it. But this one was just so funny and just so many quirky details. Okay, and then my last book is Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds, which was read by Jason Reynolds. So this is a poetry book. I do not do poetry very well. I have so much trouble sitting down and reading poems and like trying to keep the rhythms right and the flow, and also dissect it and like try to keep track of what's happening. So this was a narrative poem, which made it way better. There's a story, there's a character, there's a plot developing. It's about a boy who lives in this urban area where they have a lot of gang violence, and his brother is shot on the streets. And the police aren't going to help. Nobody in the town is coming forth and saying, we saw him get shot, or helping the police, which is pretty par for the course. And the kid's like, so I'm going to go get this guy. I have a pretty good idea who it is. I'm going to go just shoot him, kill him, then we'll be even. Except that because it's gang violence, if he shoots somebody from a different gang, then they have to come and shoot somebody else, part of his family and his community. And so they have this never-ending violence that is just constantly escalating. And this story explores that by taking us to the moment where he's in an elevator ride to leave. So he's on like one of the top floors of an apartment building. He's going down several floors to the ground floor. And at each stop, or at each floor in the elevator ride, they stop and somebody else gets on the elevator. Except the people getting on the elevator are actually ghosts. They're people that have died because of gun violence in this community. All these guys who got caught up in this violence are also showing up and telling their stories. And it's open, kind of like exploring. It doesn't really judge people for making the decision to like take the revenge, but also kind of leading that this may not be the best idea. So I loved A Long Way Down. I loved the flow. Getting to hear Jason Reynolds read it meant that it was exactly what he thought it should sound like. And it really did rev up everything to listen to all those. It basically reads as one giant poem, even though on page, if you look at the physical book, each page is a separate poem. So I enjoyed that. So definitely, if you're having trouble with poetry, try checking that out in audiobook also. There's my list. Those are my favorite audiobooks. And when I turn to audiobooks, let me know in the comments below, what are your favorites? Have you listened to any of these audiobooks? Did you also enjoy them? Are there better versions of some of these? Peace out. I love you guys and keep reading. Bye.